The gasoline collapse in Russia has now reached Moscow. An explosion on the Ryazan-Moscow oil pipeline has halted supplies to the Russian capital. Donald is on fire. Trump called Putin's statements about Zelensky's illegitimacy nonsense and threatened Russia with sanctions and economic war if it avoids negotiations. Away from Moscow, the president of Azerbaijan called the special military operation an invasion and expressed support for Ukraine's territorial integrity. He also stated that Azerbaijan's accession to the USSR was a Russian invasion and occupation. The Dondon case. We'll tell you how Ramzan Kadyrov is preparing a successor for himself in Chechnya and is rushing to place his relatives in all key positions. All this and more in detail right now. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel Ukraine Today and give this episode a like. Putin continues to look for reasons to prolong the invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin has rejected the security guarantees for Ukraine proposed by Europe. They stated that Russia has a negative attitude toward the security guarantees proposed by Europe and will not agree to the presence of NATO troops on the territory of a neighboring state. This was reported in Moscow. Let me remind you, as part of a potential peaceful settlement, Kyiv's European allies are working on security guarantees for Ukraine, which in particular may include sending troops. The press secretary of the Russian president, Peskov, said that the deployment of European troops on Ukrainian territory would mean the presence of NATO there, which, according to him, Russia has sought to prevent from the very beginning. In fact, there are no European soldiers as such. There are soldiers from specific countries, and most of these countries are NATO members, Reuters quotes Peskov as saying. Peskov also said that Russian and Ukrainian negotiators are in contact, but he could not name the date of the next round of talks. The gasoline collapse in Russia has now reached Moscow as well. An explosion on the Ryazan-Moscow oil pipeline has halted supplies to the Russian capital. Meanwhile, Russia's summer offensive in Ukraine has completely failed. Most of the objectives that Moscow set for the campaign from April to August 2025 have not been achieved. This is reported by military analysts. But there is also troubling news. For the first time since the beginning of the war, the Russian army has entered the Dnipropetrovsk region. All the details are in our military review.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirms that Ukrainian troops are engaged in combat operations near the villages of Zaporizhzhye and Novogeorgiyivka in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The Ukrainian command also draws attention to the fact that reports of these settlements allegedly being occupied by Russian forces do not correspond to reality.
It became quite abundantly obvious that this significant advance would inevitably happen after the Russian occupation forces moved beyond the strategically important locations of Zeleny Pol and Novopil, both of which are situated within the broader Donetsk region, and subsequently reached the town of Tomirivka. That is to say, their further movement was fully expected to continue accordingly along the natural courses of the rivers. Again, this is significant movement in the general direction of the Volchya River and also specifically towards the Yangul and Varana rivers if we are talking about the broader Zaporizhzhia region. So the main objective for these units right now is to advance along the courses of the Volchya and Vorona rivers directly to their junction and then continue moving forward. If we're talking about the Zaporizhzhia region, this is to encircle Huliai Pol, and if we're talking about the Dnipropetrovsk region, it's movement towards Pokrovsky.
The Russians remotely scattered Lepestok-type anti-personnel mines on one of the streets of Kherson. The National Police note that this weapon is extremely dangerous for local residents as it is very difficult to spot in the surrounding environment. And for the mine to detonate, it's enough to simply step on it or drive over it.
For them, this indiscriminate form of mining is directly related to terror against the civilian population. That is, just like the uncontrolled artillery shelling of residential areas, the indiscriminate use of multiple rocket launch systems, and targeted drone strikes against civilians, all of this is an integral part of their terror against cities located in the front line or near rear zones.
National Guard fighters have shown how they destroy enemy artillery and ammunition depots in the Pokrovsk direction. Russian military equipment has been completely put out of action, and the enemy's ammunition depot put on quite a spectacular and fiery show. Our brave defenders succinctly sum up the situation. Russia's summer offensive in Ukraine has completely failed, reports Bild military observer Julian Röpke. Although the pace of the Russian troops' advance has been the highest since November of last year.
I can't say that Russia's offensive has been a complete failure because during the summer offensive of 25, in this phase, Russian forces captured more than 1,300 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, so it's hard to call it an absolute failure. but they really did not accomplish their main objectives that had been set for them, namely the capture of the city, the encirclement of Pokrovsk from 3 directions, the encirclement of Kostiantynivka from 3 directions, the encirclement of Siversk from 3 directions, as well as Kupiansk, Lyman, and Borova.
Russian failures are nothing new, especially when they're planning to go up against new Ukrainian drones with sticks. In this video, a Russian assault soldier explains how the command ordered them to fend off a Ukrainian Baba Yaga drone with a stick so it wouldn't terrorize the infantry.
So we've created a new killer, basically, for the Baba Yaga. I hate the command, damn it, but that's how it is. They told us to use a stick. Hit the Baba Yaga with a stick so it wouldn't terrorize the infantry.
This is Andrei. He's already fought until he got wounded, but he doesn't plan to stop fighting. He says as soon as he's discharged, he'll head for Washington. For now, he's thanking the volunteers for their gifts.
Just got a little wounded, scratched up.
So nothing serious?
Yeah, everything's fine now. Next week, probably, they'll discharge me and I'll go back to the fight. We'll crawl all the way to Washington.
But our next hero doesn't have such a rosy impression of the war. Serviceman Sergei Pogadayev showed the path of an assault trooper from arriving at the front to ending up in a wheelchair. First, he says that there is no water at the positions. The soldiers drink urine, and there is no evacuation for the dead and wounded. And that all of Russia should know about this. And at the end, he checks out a new vehicle for himself.
Not bad at all. I used to always look at Mercedes, and now I find myself looking at incredible machines like this one.
This is Alexander Chernishev. He suffers from chronic hepatitis C and does not want to fight. Because of this, he and his comrades are being threatened with being zeroed out on Ukrainian territory.
They are trying to send me, a person with hepatitis, to a combat mission. I refuse. I asked to be prosecuted under criminal law. In response, they want to zero me out with threats.
Along with Chernishev, Alexei Chechnev and Yuri Kuznetsov are also being held in handcuffs at the military base. They are asking to be prosecuted for refusing to participate in combat and are appealing to the public for help so that their voices can be heard. In this video, a former Russian army serviceman calls on soldiers from Bashkiria to switch sides and fight for Ukraine.
I left the Russian army because of fratricide, hatred towards us, and lack of respect. And I joined the Bashkir company, where we are respected, valued, and treated well.
The Bashkirs, as they themselves say, are fighting against Russian Nazism and disrespect. They also help with the exchange of Bashkir prisoners and in searching for their relatives.
Trump called Putin's statements about Zelensky's illegitimacy nonsense and threatened Moscow with sanctions, although he did not rule out putting pressure on Kyiv as well. The Oval Office occupant also called Lavrov's statement about Putin refusing to meet with Zelensky a show. Moreover, the American leader promised an economic war against Russia if it avoids negotiations. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Representative Steve Witkoff announced a meeting with representatives of Ukraine as early as this week. A Trump visit to China is also looming on the horizon, and many analysts agree that this particular meeting could be decisive in ending Russia's war against Ukraine. All the details are in our international review.
US President Trump called Lavrov's statement about Zelensky's illegitimacy and Putin's refusal to meet with him nonsense and a show.
It doesn't matter what they say, they're just putting on a show. That's all there is to it. Everyone is simply putting on a performance or a show.
We recognize him as the de facto head of the regime, and in that case, we are ready to meet with him. But when it comes to signing documents, we need a very clear understanding that the person signing them is legitimate. And according to the Constitution of Ukraine, Zelensky is currently not legitimate. President Putin has made it clear that he is ready to meet with Zelensky if there is a real summit agenda for such a meeting. And that agenda is not ready at all.
His statements are, to a large extent, playing to the audience. It's an attempt to demonstrate his own political weight, which he is rapidly losing precisely because of such statements and his inability to resolve issues on the ground, so to speak, right? Mostly, the final military and effective economic solutions exist somewhere in the realm of Trump's mind, but they are rarely examples or concrete cases in real politics and economics.
Trump also promised an economic war against Russia if it avoids negotiations.
I want to stop this. This won't be a world war, but it will be an economic war. And the economic war will be tough, very tough for Russia. And I don't want that. But we need to look at the situation more broadly. You know, Zelensky isn't entirely innocent either. It takes two to tango. I say this all the time. They need to be brought to the negotiating table. Right now, I have a normal relationship with Zelensky, but it's completely different from before, because we no longer pay money to Ukraine.
Obviously, Trump's position is changing very slowly, but it is changing with regard to Russia. But for now, it's rather difficult to definitively say that there is any truly decisive point of view that could potentially become a significant trigger for fundamentally changing policy and truly increasing substantial pressure from the United States on Russia.
In the opinion of Trump's special envoy, Whitcraft, is Putin ready to sign a peace agreement?
Yes, absolutely. He wants peace. There is a peace proposal on the table. Putin really did say this, and we hope he will keep his promise.
Perhaps it's only a secret to Trump that Putin understands only the language of force. In order to achieve peace, it is necessary to create the kind of conditions that will make Putin afraid, where his army will start to fall apart. And then, the Nobel Peace Prize so desired by Trump might actually end up in his hands.
Whitcraft also announced a meeting with representatives of Ukraine this week.
I will meet with the Ukrainians this week. The meeting will be in New York. This is a big signal, and we communicate with the Russians every day, and we might see a bilateral meeting.
Meetings between groups and representatives of the US and Ukraine in various formats are happening constantly. Not all of them have any political impact. Often, these are technical negotiations, especially, I think, in the context of selling American weapons at Europe's expense using European funds. Recently, Lindsey Graham publicly stated that the US is allegedly preparing to lift the ban on using American weapons for strikes deep inside Russia. This could be a major step forward in general in the overall policy framework.
President Zelensky also reported that this week there will be contacts with a number of countries that could serve as platforms for negotiations with the Russians.
Now,
this week there will be contacts with Turkey, with Gulf countries, and with European countries that could serve as platforms for talks with the Russians. On our part, everything will be as ready as possible to end the war. It is important that our partners confirm this. And going forward, everything will depend solely on the will of world leaders, primarily the United States of America, to put pressure on Russia.
It seems that everyone is preparing for negotiations except Putin. According to analysts, Putin will reject the proposal from the United States and Europe regarding security guarantees for Ukraine. All recent statements by Russian officials point to this.
It is absolutely clear to everyone that there are a number of principles that, according to Washington, must be accepted, including renouncing NATO membership and discussing territorial issues. And Zelensky said no to all of it. He also said no to repealing the legislation that bans the Russian language.
In order to end the war, and as we can see for Trump, this is truly one of the highest priorities, the very approach needs to be changed. We need to stop trying to persuade Putin, stop looking for ways to approach him, and instead act decisively and with focus. And in this context, of course, the first thing is sanctions, and the second is supporting Ukraine in the military sphere.
We can only guess how much more time and how many more Ukrainians killed it will take for Trump to admit that Putin is not actually his friend, but a ruthless killer who manipulates everyone around him for his own interests.
Trump continues to legitimize Lukashenko. The mustachioed tyrant offered the American president to release political prisoners in exchange for easing sanctions. Lukashenko is negotiating with American diplomats about the further release of prisoners. This is reported by sources from Rzeczpospolita. 3 independent sources have confirmed that the decision could affect the majority of the remaining 100 to 300 hostages of the regime, who would then be taken to one of the EU countries. All the details are known to our journalists.
Prisoners in exchange for lifting sanctions. This is Lukashenko's kind of political barter.
As I promised you, a virtually new generation has been brought to power. Well, I was a little late, but bear with me. There have to be some experienced people too.
The essence of the proposal is simple. The self-proclaimed president of Belarus offered to release political prisoners in exchange for easing American sanctions.
I think it depends on which sanctions we're talking about. Some might be eased, but of course some will definitely remain. That's for sure. Lukashenko remains a dictator, and accordingly, no one is planning to lift all the sanctions against him. But the fact that such bargaining could take place is actually quite likely. Let me remind you that it was Trump who called Lukashenko while on his way to Alaska.
According to media reports, the decision could affect the majority of the approximately 1,300 political prisoners. But the question arises, why are we talking about the majority and not all of them?
I think that in order to release everyone, there would have to be some specific perks for him, for Lukashenko himself. That's why, of course, he will hold back some leverage for future negotiations.
And the organizations that have suffered the most from the sanctions are Belavia and Belaruskali, the country's key companies.
I think that there is a chance that at least for one of these companies, the sanctions might be lifted. In my opinion, the likelihood is higher for Belavia. But for Lukashenko, of course, both Belavia and Belaruskali are important. Belaruskali is a truly major and significant supplier of essential mineral fertilizers to the global market. As for Belavia, Lukashenko specifically developed Minsk as a kind of crucial and central transit hub, serving as a vital connection point for various routes and destinations.
Be that as it may, earlier Lukashenko also pardoned 14 political prisoners. This happened on June 21st after Keith Kellogg's visit to Minsk. At that time, there was no talk of sanctions.
And we simply don't know what they agreed on with Kellogg and what Kellogg promised him. Just because we don't see it in the public domain doesn't mean there weren't any agreements that we don't know about. It's quite possible that there were indeed some agreements. And perhaps these very agreements included the beginning of a move toward easing, not lifting yet, but easing some sanctions.
Nevertheless, if there's one thing Lukashenko is a master at, it's changing his stance on the fly.
Let's be objective. Is Trump a blabbermouth? He is. For example, in the morning he says one thing, in the evening he does another.
But after a little while, he already demonstrates a different position.
At the same time, keep in mind, I'm a Trump supporter. That's what I often call myself. I'm not a supporter of Biden, and I said that when Biden was in power.
So what's the point of all this? It is reported that in addition to economic issues, Putin's body is also interested in establishing relations with that very blabbermouth, meaning Trump. The Belarusian leader even invited the US president and his family to visit Minsk.
Of course, it is abundantly clear that no one would actually seriously consider letting him into that particular situation. However, utilizing this as a significant opportunity, including to strategically position himself as a prominent sort of right-wing politician in order to primarily engage in discussions with certain influential right-wing European figures, be it someone like Marine Le Pen, or even Viktor Orban or Robert Fico. Yes, this is quite a typical and indeed a very common political maneuver.
But somewhere on the horizon, the Kremlin is always looming. How can that be? Putin and Lukashenko are best friends.
Sorry for interrupting you. Right time, right place.
But will Lukashenko's attempts to establish contact with Trump affect this friendship? Or does everyone understand that this is just politics and nothing personal?
If Putin could pressure Lukashenko and force him to bend, he would have done it long ago. But however, Putin hasn't been able to do that. So what Putin wants isn't all that important. Putin hasn't managed to fully subjugate Belarus in all his 25 years, and he won't be able to do it now either.
Despite sanctions and international isolation, the mustachioed tyrant is looking for any opportunity to survive and to show that Belarus means something. And at the same time, he remains confident in his own uniqueness.
Half the entire world dreams of our dictatorship, a dictatorship of real, decisive action and the paramount interests of our people.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Ramzan Kadyrov is preparing his family for his own demise. To protect his loved ones from attacks by enemies, Dondon is strengthening their positions by appointing them to leadership roles. Observers have already counted about 80 such family appointments. All the details are coming up next.
The system of power in Chechnya has long been built around the cult of the Kadyrov family. For Ramzan Kadyrov, this is both a strength and a weakness. Everything is personally subordinated to him. But new data shows it's not just about controlling the region. Dondon is building a true dynasty, consolidating his influence in case of his death.
I appoint only those individuals whom I truly trust.
According to BBC estimates, more than 80 members of the Kadyrov clan now hold key positions in the government. 20 control the security forces, 11 sit in parliament. The rest are ministers, businessmen, heads of foundations and sports clubs. This is no coincidence. It is a carefully constructed system of hereditary power transfer.
The people have simply resigned themselves to their fate. They are not submissive. Absolutely, I know this. We have a very serious underground movement in Chechnya, but today the situation in Chechnya can be described as, well, a concentration camp where everyone is gathered and the entire population is being held hostage. There are those who serve this regime, and both on television and in propaganda, they use exactly those people who now serve this system, the occupation structures. But the general population who are waiting and biding their time, they are not seen or noticed by anyone. People are simply trying to survive and make it through this situation today.
Kadyrov also strengthened the system through marriage alliances. His children have become related by marriage to at least 15 influential Chechen clans, the Delimkhanovs, the Geremayevs, the Vismuradovs, and others. In this way, through weddings and business, he creates a shield for his family, turning Chechnya into his personal principality.
With these significant marital ties and strategic alliances, Kadyrov is actively trying to secure the personal and unwavering support of the most influential and powerful Chechen clans. Just in case this informal and unwritten contract with Putin, the Russian dictator and leader, is unexpectedly terminated or brought to an end. We know that for many years, Kadyrov had the right to basically do whatever he wanted and remain unpunished, and he made active use of that, whether it was political assassinations, influencing federal politics, corruption, or these harems that the project reported on. He took advantage in all these areas. So if Vladimir Putin does eventually and definitively abandon the established logic of personal immunity for Ramzan Kadyrov and his influential clan, then the Kadyrov family will inevitably have to rely solely on the unwavering loyalty of other significant Chechen clans, those closely aligned with Kadyrov's, but still existing quite separately and distinctly from it.
The heirs have already been assigned their roles. The eldest, Akhmat, heads the sports and football club Akhmat. The second, Zelimkhan, runs the fight club and the boxing federation. But according to experts, the main successor is the third son, Adam. His scandalous notoriety has only helped him. After beating a prisoner in the Grozny pretrial detention center, the teenager was not charged. Instead, he was rewarded. A few weeks later, he became the youngest head of the regional leader's security service. At 17, Adam is already the secretary of the Chechen Security Council. His career path remarkably mirrors that of Ramzan himself. Everything is also mapped out for the women in the family. The eldest daughter, Aishat, went from fashion designer to deputy prime minister and now owns the Chechen mineral water company with billions in revenue. Khadijat, Tabarik, and Kutmat, along with their husbands, have also been placed in key positions in government and business. But behind the facade of glamour and ostentatious luxury lies fear. Dondon's own health has been a concern for several years now. Frequent medical leaves, rumors of a serious diagnosis, and absences from federal events. For the Kremlin, Kadyrov remains a guarantor of stability, but the question of his successor is still unresolved. The law does not allow his sons to take the position of head before the age of 30. This means that Moscow will have to seek a compromise between the interests of the clan and the formal requirements of the law. And while the family prepares to inherit power after Ramzan's departure, behind the scenes, Moscow may be preparing a completely different scenario.
The president of Azerbaijan called the so-called special military operation an invasion and expressed support for Ukraine's territorial integrity. From the very first days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have supported the country's territorial integrity, and we continue to support it, Aliyev said. He also stated that Azerbaijan's accession to the USSR was a Russian invasion and occupation. According to him, the Soviet Union prevented Azerbaijan from developing as a democratic republic by occupying it in 1920. We created our own state, but the Bolsheviks took it away from us. That is a verbatim quote from Aliyev. The irony of fate for Putinist Markov, a fervent supporter of the Russian dictator and the war against Ukraine. The Kremlin has labeled him a foreign agent, and Solovyov is even demanding that he be thrown in jail. Details of yet another Russian mudslinging scandal are in our report. And while watching, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel Ukraine Today.
The irony of fate for Russian propagandists. Just yesterday you were calling to crack down on foreign agents, and today you're already putting up a shameful banner on your social media. A so-called political analyst, Sergei Markov, has been a constant presence on Russian TV in recent years, and on his Telegram channel, Markov's Logic, he championed Putin's policies, criticized the West, naturally supported the so-called special military operation, and backed the first wave of repressions.
Foreign agents, of course, need to be dealt with more harshly, and a bit more intelligently, too. We shouldn't let things turn out like in Saltykov-Shkedrin's tales. Remember, the bear ate the siskin on the willow. We shouldn't be eating siskins. Well, of course, we do need to be tougher. Most importantly, they should be cut off from all our information resources, from the ability to reach a Russian audience, and from the possibility of receiving money. I think that's one of the things that should be done. If you're somehow acting against Russia, then you shouldn't be able to get money from the Russian market.
But Markov ended up sinking himself unexpectedly and foolishly for many people. He didn't have time to adjust to the cooling of relations between Russia and Azerbaijan, went to the Shusha Media Forum, and out of habit started praising the hand that feeds, in this case, Aliyev.
Because you know that he is a brilliant intellectual, graduated from GIMO, where I also taught a bit, and without a doubt is one of the most experienced leaders in the modern world, the leader who represents a victorious country. There aren't many countries that have achieved a complete victory, but in this case they won the war outright and fully restored control, liberating the entire territory of Karabakh. And in this sense, many other leaders would like to learn from him, to know what the secret of victory is.
In Russia, which has weakened in the region after the resolution of the Karabakh conflict and has nothing to boast about in the war it started in Ukraine, Markov's flattery was not appreciated. The first to attack him were the so-called war correspondents and his longtime rival, propagandist Vladimir Solovyov, whose show has not featured Markov's expertise for 10 years.
Regarding Baku, yes, two people allowed themselves an act of phenomenal and professional human meanness, at a time when our fellow journalists are languishing in Azerbaijani prisons.
Yes, my employees, and you can't imagine, because of this I can't sleep on the chain. As you know, I have reasons to sleep on the chain. 2 more of our guys, my employees, will not end up behind bars.
And so, 2 citizens of the Russian Federation, one of whom until recently held a high position, end up in Shusha at the personal invitation of the Azerbaijani side. And they did not allow themselves to ask a question about the fate of our colleagues. They allowed themselves to gush with praise, but they did not allow themselves to ask that question. This is a manifestation not only of professional, but also of human baseness.
That's true.
Fortunately, one of them was sent into retirement. Due to age, I hasten to add. And as for the second one, I hope that a certain Markov will never again be invited to any Russian media outlet. Or else, let him simply be declared as an agent of a foreign state, working in our country to serve its interests.
It's unclear whether it was instigated by Solovyov or not, but attacks on Markov started coming from all sides. Moreover, propagandists began to dig up dark secrets and white spots in the biography of the once popular political analyst. It turned out that no one in Russia knows where the pro-Putin propagandist activist started out.
There is no record of this address in Dubna in old directories, and he never lived with his parents in Moscow. Other details of Markov's life that he shared about himself also appeared to be fragmentary. From the age of 16 to 18, he worked as a locksmith at the Dubna machine building plant, then served in the KGB border troops. After that, he enrolled in the Faculty of Philosophy at Moscow State University, which he graduated from with distinction.
And then things only got bigger. Journalists dug up the following. Markov's daughter, who moved to Germany for permanent residence 10 years ago and now consults from Berlin on business matters related to ecology. His wife, who runs her own business in Bulgaria, and even an assistant, his probable lover, who gave birth to Markov's child.
The young woman is originally from Vladimir, but she moved long ago to Yablochkova Street, to an apartment that, according to Rosrister records, was purchased by Sergei Markov in 2014. We're talking about a small 3-room apartment in a panel building worth around 20 million rubles. Literally just across the courtyard, in the neighboring building, is Markov's officially declared residence. Grivtsova is also a member of the chats for the Baltic residential complex, where Markov bought an apartment, and she uses a space at the bread factory, but not the one purchased by the political analyst, rather an adjacent one, twice as large and with access to the roof. Such an asset would be worth about 30 million rubles. Recently, Daria Grivtsova has been active in online communities focused on rentals and investments in Dubai. From her messages, you might think she flies there as casually as going to a country house.
In short, the patriot and Putin supporter Markov is just like everyone else he used to shout for, except now he's been recently branded a foreign agent, and his old enemies have decided to seize the moment and are calling for a crackdown on foreign agents.
Well, now our national messenger has come under attack, Max. There's been such a hysterical campaign against it that you realize someone must have paid for it. And what does it mean that someone paid? It means that there are still extensive networks of foreign agents operating within the country. Well, they exposed one Azerbaijani agent, but he still needs to be put in jail. We still need to check what kind of money was involved there and put him in prison. In other words, we need to finish off all these agents of influence completely.
Now Markov, who himself recently called for cracking down on foreign agents, is afraid he might end up behind bars. And he writes even more about his loyalty to Putin and his policies, promises to solve problems within the framework of the law, though he has no intention of suing the state or giving interviews, obviously hoping that he'll get away with it.